My family joked about my little hobby at dinner. Not knowing I'm the CEO, they look up to me father. Leaned forward over the pristine white tablecloth of the upscale French restaurant, gesturing lazily toward my brother's new fiancée with his wineglass, his voice coated in that smooth artificial charm he reserved for investors and strangers, telling her not to worry about me and calling me the family's ongoing improvement project. His words landing softly but cutting deep. The woman across from him, Evelyn, did not laugh or smile. She studied me instead with narrowed eyes like she was attempting to solve a difficult equation that refused to balance. My name is Claire Vaughn, and I am 29 years old. For as long as memory stretches back, I have existed as the quiet space in a family addicted to noise. My parents built a boutique investment firm in Chicago and worshipped polish and performance. My older brother Marcus absorbed every lesson they offered and became the crown jewel of their legacy. He wore ambition like a tailored suit and never missed a chance to display it. Their world thrived on volume and optics. Value was measured in assets and access, in club memberships and impressive titles. Success was something loud and visible, something that sparkled under chandeliers. Then there was me, uninterested in managing portfolios or mimicking their path. I wanted to build something new, something disruptive, something that did not already exist. I started a logistics software company from the corner of a freezing studio apartment. My days blurred into nights filled with server noise and cold coffee. My life shrank down to code and calls and relentless iteration. To my family, this did not look like dedication or ambition. It looked like avoidance. They saw my thrift store close and my absence from their galas, not as sacrifices, but as confirmation that I could not compete in their arena. They loved me in a distant, obligatory way, but shame clung to their affection. They spoke of me like a cautionary tale. What they never knew was that my quiet existence was building pressure. It was a storm forming silently behind closed doors. They treated me like a problem that needed fixing rather than a person carving her own path. And that misunderstanding shaped everything that followed. The only reason we were gathered at that restaurant was to celebrate Marcus's engagement. He was marrying Evelyn, a senior partner at a powerful venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, the kind of woman my parents had always hoped he would attract. To impress her, they reserved a private wine room that smelled of old oak and entitlement. The evening felt less like a family dinner and more like a corporate negotiation. Dressed in linen and crystal, my father launched into exaggerated stories about Marcus's recent deals. My mother layered praise onto Evelyn's career with enthusiasm that bordered on worship. Despite knowing little about the industry, she spoke confidently. I remained silent and nudged food around my plate, wrapped in that familiar cloak of invisibility that had followed me into every room since childhood. Eventually, attention shifted toward me and the air seemed to chill. My mother explained with a patronizing smile that I was still experimenting with computers. She squeezed my hand like one might soothe a child. Marcus followed with a grin that never reached his eyes, offering to explain how they had tried to help me get serious by offering an entry-level position at their firm. Something simple like answering phones or filing papers. Evelyn turned to me politely and asked what I was working on. Before I could answer, my father dismissed the topic with a wave, calling it boring and reducing my work to a generic app, labeling it a hobby. His sigh carried the weight of a man burdened by disappointment. For several minutes they spoke about me as if I were not there, crafting a narrative of confusion and immaturity. I focused on the condensation sliding down my glass to avoid reacting. The final blow came when the bill arrived. My father theatrically pulled out his black card and glanced at me with false sympathy, telling me not to worry about the cost and to save my money for rent. The message was unmistakable. I was the charity case, the outsider. I nodded without speaking, swallowing words that felt too heavy to lift. This moment was not an exception. It was the culmination of years of quiet exclusion. A month earlier, my parents hosted an extravagant summer party at their lake house. Investors and politicians mingled beneath string lights. I learned about it through photos online. Every family member smiling on the dock, except me. When I asked my mother about it, she claimed they did not want to overwhelm me with such a high-level crowd. She said they feared I would feel inadequate. That word echoed painfully. It was not accidental. It was deliberate distance. They were protecting their image from the stain they believed I represented. Public moments cut even deeper. At a neighborhood barbecue, my father joked loudly about Marcus's expanding responsibilities and then reduced my life to a punchline about finding myself. The laughter followed me all the way home. The breaking point arrived days before the engagement dinner, when Marcus called offering money so I could buy a dress that looked respectable. He framed it as concern, but it was control. He wanted to curate my appearance so I would not disrupt his perfect image. I declined calmly and ended the call. Sitting alone afterward, surrounded by a reality they never bothered to see while they played tennis and attended luncheons. I joined pre-dawn calls with developers overseas. While they bragged about commissions, I finalized a major funding round with international backers. They heard the word app and assumed triviality. They never imagined I was building an AI-driven supply chain platform already attracting serious acquisition interest. I was bound by non-disclosure agreements until the funding closed. Silence was not just strategic, it was required. The night Marcus offered his charity, I had just signed the final documents. My company valuation surpassed my father's entire firm. The irony lingered, bitter and sharp. Back at the restaurant, tension thickened. Evelyn continued, asking thoughtful questions about markets and burn rates, steering conversation back to me when others talked over. My parents shifted uncomfortably. Marcus laughed nervously and dismissed her curiosity, insisting I was just experimenting, that she worked with real founders. My mother sighed and expressed hope that I would find a stable partner to take care of me so I could abandon my foolish pursuit. Evelyn set her fork down slowly, her expression changing as understanding flickered across her face. She leaned forward and asked me directly the name of my company. My pulse thundered as I met her gaze and answered quietly, Atlas Flow. The room fell silent as her eyes widened. The shift in energy was immediate, and everything was about to change. Evelyn repeated the company name softly, as if testing the weight of it in the air. Her posture straightened and the warmth she had been wearing all evening disappeared, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who lived inside boardrooms and deal rooms. My parents exchanged confused glances. My father let out a strained laugh that sounded misplaced and thin. Clearly assuming this was still a misunderstanding, he could smooth over. She leaned back slightly, then forward again. Her eyes locked on mine with a mix of disbelief and confirmation. She said the name again and added my last name, connecting pieces my family never bothered to examine. The room seemed to shrink as her words landed. Marcus frowned as if she had spoken in another language. My mother stiffened, gripping her napkin like a lifeline. Evelyn explained calmly that Atlas Flow had become a quiet obsession in her firm, that analysts whispered about it as the logistics platform no one could touch, the one operating under layers of legal protection and intentional silence. She described months of failed attempts to reach the founder, how every inquiry hit a wall designed by someone who understood leverage and timing better than most seasoned executives. My father opened his mouth to interrupt, but nothing came out. His confidence drained so quickly it was almost visible. My mother stared at me as though seeing a stranger sitting in my chair. Marcus shook his head slightly, still convinced this was some elaborate coincidence that would correct itself any second. Evelyn reached for her phone and slid it across the table. The screen glowed with an article from a major financial publication describing Atlas Flow as an emerging force reshaping global supply chains. The founder, identified only by my initials and last name, praised for disappearing from public view while scaling aggressively through international partnerships. There was no photo, just a logo and words that felt surreal to see reflected in their stunned faces. She asked again if it was me, not in disbelief now but in confirmation. I nodded once and took a slow sip of water. The quiet confidence felt earned and steady. The insults and jokes from earlier hovered in the air, stripped of power, suddenly exposed as ignorance rather than judgment. Marcus leaned back sharply, his chair scraping the floor. Jealousy and panic crossed his face in quick succession. He muttered something about not knowing and being busy, excuses tumbling out before he could organize them. My mother whispered my name like she was testing it on her tongue for the first time. My father stared at the screen, then at me, then back again like his world had cracked open. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She stated plainly that her firm had standing instructions to pursue Atlas Flow aggressively, that partners had debated strategy meetings around a founder who refused to be rushed or flattered. She said the restraint alone signaled power. The room absorbed her words in stunned silence. My father finally spoke, claiming ignorance and misunderstanding, insisting he would have supported me if he had known. His voice wavered under the weight of exposure. Evelyn cut him off without hostility, saying he did not ask, and that was the difference. The statement landed heavier than any accusation. For the first time in my life, my family had nothing to say. The quiet that followed was complete and absolute, not the kind that erased me, but the kind that elevated me. I felt no urge to argue or explain. My work had already spoken louder than I ever could. I placed my napkin beside my plate carefully and stood smoothing my dress, the same one Marcus had tried to replace with his money. I thanked Evelyn genuinely for her interest and suggested our teams connect the following week. She nodded immediately, already shifting into professional mode. Recognizing the moment for what it was then, I turned to my family. They looked smaller than I remembered, their authority dissolved by information they could not control. I mentioned an early meeting the next morning and wished them a pleasant evening. I reminded my father casually that he had insisted on covering dinner. The symmetry felt almost poetic. I walked out of the private room without looking back. The dining area buzzed with unrelated conversations and clinking glasses. None of it touched me. The night air outside was cool and grounding. I breathed deeply, feeling years of tension release with each step behind me. The silence was not neglect or dismissal. It was collapse. The hierarchy they built around perception had finally given way. They did not lose me that night. They lost me incrementally over years of jokes and exclusions and assumptions. This moment simply revealed the cost. As I walked toward my car, my phone buzzed with messages from my assistant confirming upcoming meetings. The contrast between my two worlds felt sharp and validating. I slid into the driver's seat, grounded and calm, knowing that nothing about my life had changed except their awareness. The following days moved quickly. News of the dinner spread quietly through the right channels, not as gossip but as confirmation. Evelyn kept her word, and our teams connected professionally. Discussions unfolded with mutual respect and precision, exactly how I had always preferred to operate. My parents called repeatedly. Their voicemails shifted from confusion to apology to pride. Each message arrived too late to reshape what had already settled inside me. I listened once, then stopped answering. Distance felt necessary and deserved. Marcus sent a long message filled with explanations and misplaced humor. He congratulated me and hinted at future collaboration. I archived it without response. Ambition did not excuse blindness, and familiarity did not erase. Years of dismissal. Weeks passed, and Atlas Flow continued its trajectory. Contracts finalized and partnerships expanded. The work grounded me and reminded me why I chose silence over validation. Power moved best when unannounced. Occasionally, I thought about that dinner, about the moment recognition snapped into place on Evelyn's face, about how quickly respect followed proof. It was not satisfying in a petty way, it was clarifying. I had never been wrong about my path. One evening, my mother finally reached me through a mutual contact, her voice softer than I remembered. She said she wanted to understand me now. I told her, understanding required listening, not correction. The pause that followed was heavy and unresolved. I did not feel anger anymore, just clarity. My life was no longer shaped by their approval or rejection. It moved forward on its own momentum, built through intention and patience. The world they valued had finally seen me, but more importantly, I had always seen myself, and that recognition had been enough long before anyone else noticed. The week after the dinner unfolded like a controlled acceleration rather than chaos. My calendar filled with strategy calls and legal reviews while my personal phone remained mostly silent. I moved through my days with the same discipline that had carried me through years of obscurity. Yet something subtle had shifted inside me. The weight of being unseen had lifted even though I had not asked for recognition or validation. Atlas Flow entered a new phase as discussions with Evelyn's firm progressed. Not rushed and not performative. Every conversation focused on infrastructure and scale rather than hype. I respected that immediately. It mirrored the way I had always built, quietly and deliberately, without spectacle. Our teams exchanged documents and projections with a shared understanding that this partnership was about alignment, not dominance. At the same time, my family struggled to recalibrate their perception of me. Messages trickled in through relatives and mutual acquaintances, everyone suddenly curious and careful with their tone. My parents attempted to insert themselves into conversations they had never shown interest in before, mentioning articles they barely understood and using terminology that felt rehearsed. I declined invitations politely and consistently, not out of spite, but because boundaries were overdue. My work demanded clarity, and emotional distance was part of that clarity. The irony was not lost on me that the silence they once imposed now unsettled them. It revealed how dependent they were on control and narrative. Marcus tried again to reconnect, this time suggesting lunch near his office, framing it as a chance to celebrate together. I considered it briefly, then declined. Celebration implies shared journey, and ours had diverged long ago. His ambition had always required an audience while mine thrived without one. Evelyn and I met privately weeks later in a neutral space, a quiet conference room overlooking the city. No entourage and no theatrics. She spoke candidly about her first impression of me at the dinner and admitted she had underestimated the depth of my restraint. I appreciated her honesty. We discussed leadership styles and the cost of visibility. She explained that Atlas Flow had become a case study within her firm long before she met me, admired not only for its technology but for the discipline of its founder. Disappearing at the peak of curiosity was not common. It created leverage most founders never experience. I listened without pride or defensiveness, simply acknowledging the strategy that had come from necessity rather than design. As negotiations progressed, my parents intensified their attempts to reach me. My mother left messages describing childhood memories and shared sacrifices. My father sent articles about female founders as if discovering a new language. The sudden interest felt less like support and more like regret. Trying to outrun itself, I allowed one brief call with them under clear conditions. No apologies, and no rewriting history, only listening. The conversation was strained and uneven. My father spoke about being proud while avoiding specifics. My mother asked how she could help now. I told her help would have looked like curiosity years ago. After the call ended, I felt no relief or closure, just confirmation. Reconciliation without accountability was not healing. It was convenience. I returned to my work immediately, grounded by the certainty that I had not imagined the past. Atlas Flow announced its funding quietly through industry channels. No press tour and no interviews. The numbers spoke for themselves. Partnerships solidified across regions and operational teams expanded with precision. I spent long hours refining systems and mentoring leaders who shared my values. In those moments, I reflected on the years my family had labeled me lost, the isolation that forced me inward and sharpened my focus. Every dismissal had become fuel without my realizing it at the time. Silence had not weakened me, it had strengthened my resolve. Occasionally, I encountered acquaintances who knew my family and now approached me differently, their tone cautious and deferential. I kept interactions brief and professional, respect that arrives only after proof carries less weight than respect given freely. Evelyn remained consistent throughout the process, never overstepping and never patronizing. Our partnership evolved into mutual trust grounded in competence. She never apologized for her role at the dinner, and she did not need to. Her actions afterward defined her character far more than words. As months passed, my parents slowly retreated from their attempts to reconnect, perhaps realizing that access was no longer guaranteed. The absence felt peaceful. I had built a life where my worth was not negotiated at a dinner table. One afternoon, I received an invitation to a large industry summit where Atlas Flow would be referenced in multiple panels. My name was requested but not required. I declined the spotlight and sent my head of operations instead. Visibility was a tool, not a reward. I thought back to the night my father called my work a hobby. The memory no longer stung. It felt distant, like a story I had outgrown. Perspective had replaced pain. Marcus sent one final message months later, congratulating me on another milestone and expressing hope that we could talk someday. I left it unread. Closure does not always require conversation. The real resolution came quietly during a late evening at my office. Lights low and systems humming steadily. I reviewed dashboards reflecting growth across continents, each metric representing effort and belief that had existed long before recognition. And I understood then that my story was never about proving them wrong. It was about trusting myself when no one else did. Success had not changed who I was. It had simply revealed what had always been there. The silence that once isolated me had become my strength. And in that silence, I built something enduring. Not just a company, but a life defined by intention rather than expectation. The months that followed settled into a steady rhythm that felt both demanding and grounding. Atlas Flow expanded its operations across regions with careful intention, every decision filtered through long-term impact rather than short-term praise. I spent most mornings reviewing reports before sunrise and most nights refining strategy after the city quieted. This pace did not exhaust me, it felt aligned, like the life I had been quietly preparing for all along. As the company grew, the invitations multiplied. Industry conferences, closed-door summits, private dinners hosted by people who once would have dismissed me without hesitation. One accepted very few and declined most without explanation. Visibility had a cost, and I had learned early that access should be earned through alignment rather than curiosity. Evelyn remained a consistent presence through this phase, not hovering and not absent. She respected the boundaries I set and mirrored them in our professional relationship. When challenges arose, she addressed them directly without performance. That steadiness reinforced my decision to partner with her firm and confirmed that trust could exist without familiarity. My family watched from a distance as news filtered through networks they understood. Articles referencing Atlas Flow circulated among their peers. My parents' names occasionally surfaced in conversations they could no longer control. Acquaintances reached out to them seeking introductions they did not have. The shift in power was subtle but unmistakable. My mother sent a handwritten letter instead of a voicemail one afternoon. The envelope felt heavier than paper. Inside, she wrote about regret and confusion and love tangled together. She admitted she had not known how to relate to a path that did not mirror her own values. The honesty was imperfect but real. I did not respond immediately. Reflection deserved time. Marcus tried again through indirect channels, mentioning shared childhood memories to cousins and hinting at reconciliation. I did not correct the narrative or encourage it. Distance was not punishment. It was protection. The clarity I had built did not allow space for unresolved dynamics to resurface unchecked inside. Atlas Flow leadership evolved naturally. Managers stepped into roles with confidence and initiative. Teams operated with autonomy grounded in shared principles. I prioritized culture as deliberately as technology, knowing that sustainable growth depended on both. Watching others thrive within what I had built carried a satisfaction deeper than recognition. One evening, during a quarterly review, my head of operations presented metrics that surpassed our most optimistic projections. Expansion into new logistics corridors exceeded expectations and system efficiency improved across all regions. The room buzzed with quiet pride. I thanked the team and reminded them that momentum required humility and discipline. Applause followed briefly, then work resumed later. That night alone in my office, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. The city lights framed the windows like constellations. I thought about the version of myself who coded through cold nights believing in something no one else could see. The contrast was stark, yet the core felt unchanged. My parents attempted another call weeks later after an industry publication mentioned Atlas Flow alongside legacy firms, including theirs. The irony was not lost on me. I accepted the call this time with guarded openness. The conversation was cautious. My father spoke about legacy and continuity. My mother listened more than she spoke. I told them plainly that success had not rewritten the past. It had simply clarified it. I said trust would require consistency, not proximity. They agreed without argument. Whether they fully understood was uncertain, but the acknowledgement marked progress. After the call ended, I felt neither relief nor resentment, just a quiet acceptance that some relationships evolve slowly and others never fully repair. Either outcome was survivable. My life no longer hinged on their recognition. As Atlas Flow prepared for another major expansion, Evelyn suggested a joint appearance at a closed forum of global operators. The audience would be small and strategic. I agreed under the condition that the focus remain on systems, not personalities. She accepted without hesitation. The forum unfolded exactly as intended. Discussions centered on infrastructure resilience and ethical scalability. My contribution was technical and grounded, not inspirational or dramatic. Afterward, several leaders approached with thoughtful follow-ups rather than flattery. Those conversations mattered. News of my appearance circulated quietly, enough to signal presence without spectacle. I returned to work the next day without interruption. The balance felt right. My mother sent another message weeks later, referencing the letter she had written. She thanked me for listening and said she was trying to learn how to ask instead of assume. The shift was small but meaningful. I responded briefly, acknowledging the effort and setting no expectations beyond honesty. Marcus remained distant. His silence no longer heavy, it simply existed. I released the need to define it. One afternoon, an internal mentor program launched at Atlas Flow, pairing early career engineers with senior leaders. I attended the first session anonymously, listening rather than leading. Hearing their aspirations reminded me why I built this company in the first place. Opportunities should not require conformity. Driving home that night, I passed the neighborhood where my parents once hosted lavish gatherings. Lights glowed behind tall windows. I did not slow down. Nostalgia held no pull. The true change was not external. It lived in how I moved through the world without shrinking or hardening. Success had not made me louder. It had made me steadier. My silence now carried weight rather than absence. I understood that my family's transformation, if it came, would be their own work. Mine was already done. I had built something enduring from doubt and discipline. That foundation did not require approval. As the year closed, Atlas Flow prepared for its next phase with confidence. The future unfolded, not as a reaction to the past, but as a continuation of intention. I stepped forward, grounded and fully aware of who I was and why I had always trusted the quiet path. The final stretch of that year arrived without ceremony. Atlas Flow moved forward with calm certainty. Systems expanded, and teams matured. Every milestone felt less like a victory lap, and more like confirmation that patience had been the right currency all along. I no longer measured progress by how far I had come from my family, but by how steadily I was moving toward what mattered. The company entered a phase where my role shifted again. Less hands-on execution, and more long-range vision. I spent hours thinking about sustainability and ethics. about how power moved through infrastructure and how quietly it could be abused if left unchecked. Building responsibly required restraint and constant self-interrogation. That discipline echoed the same restraint that once kept me invisible. Evelyn and I reviewed partnership outcomes at the end of the fiscal cycle. The numbers exceeded expectations, yet our conversation focused on risk and responsibility. She acknowledged that working with me had reshaped how her firm evaluated founders. Less emphasis on charisma and more on systems thinking. That shift mattered more to me than any headline. My parents remained present but peripheral. Occasional updates and brief conversations replaced constant tension. My mother continued writing letters, each one slightly more reflective and less defensive. My father spoke less and listened more when we talked. Change came slowly, but it came honestly. I accepted it without demanding more. Marcus did not resurface in any meaningful way. The silence between us became neutral rather than charged. I learned that closure did not require confrontation or forgiveness ceremonies. Sometimes, distance was the most respectful conclusion available. Atlas Flow launched a new internal initiative focused on accessibility and talent from overlooked regions. Watching teams form around that mission brought a quiet pride. I saw pieces of my own early isolation reflected in the determination of others. This time they would not have to build alone. One evening after a long review session, I stayed late in the office. Lights dim and hallways empty. The hum of servers echoed softly like a familiar companion. I thought back to the first nights in my small apartment when doubt pressed in from every side. The contrast was sharp, but the thread connecting those moments remained unbroken. Recognition came occasionally now, but it landed differently. Awards and invitations passed through my awareness without settling. They were acknowledgments, not identity. I declined most and accepted a few when alignment existed. Presence remained intentional. My mother asked one afternoon if she could visit the office someday, not as a tour, but to understand. The request surprised me with its simplicity. I told her she could when the time felt right. There was no rush. Healing did not operate on deadlines. The following weeks unfolded with steady purpose. Atlas Flow prepared for another expansion cycle. Leaders emerged from within, and systems held under pressure. I trusted the structure we had built because it was designed to function without constant oversight. Resilience mattered more than control. It a small leadership retreat. I shared parts of my story without drama or embellishment, focusing on silence as strategy rather than suffering. The room listened with attention, not pity. Afterwards, several people thanked me quietly. That response felt aligned with everything I valued. Driving home that night, I realized the story no longer lived in reaction to my family or their approval. It stood on its own merit, independent and complete. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined the narrative. As the new year approached, Atlas Flow finalized long-term objectives. The roadmap stretched years ahead, grounded in intention rather than ambition. I felt a calm confidence knowing that whatever unfolded would be met with the same discipline that had carried me this far. My parents attended a small holiday gathering hosted by extended family. I joined briefly and left early. The atmosphere was respectful and subdued. No one made jokes or assumptions. The shift was noticeable and sufficient. Later that night, my mother sent a message, thanking me for coming and for giving them time to learn. I responded simply, wishing her well. The exchange felt complete without ceremony. In the quiet weeks that followed, I reflected on how silence had transformed from punishment to power. What once erased me had ultimately protected me. It allowed me to build without interference and to define success on my own terms. Atlas Flow continued its work uninterrupted. The company no longer needed my constant presence to thrive. That independence marked the true success of any founder, creating something that outgrows the need for validation or defense. One evening, as I closed my laptop and prepared to leave the office, I paused by the window. City lights stretched endlessly and steadily. I felt grounded, not triumphant. Content, not loud. The journey had never been about proving others wrong. It had been about believing myself when no one else did. About choosing the quiet path and staying on it even when it felt invisible. That choice built everything that followed. The world eventually noticed, but by then, it no longer mattered. I had already won the only battle that counted, the one against doubt and distraction. The one fought entirely in silence. I stepped into the night carrying no resentment and no need for applause, only clarity and momentum. The echoes of dismissal had faded, replaced by purpose. My story did not end with recognition. It continued with intention, and that was enough.